You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davis. Today's debate is about the radicalisation of Britain's African communities. Last month saw mainland Britain's first terrorist killing since the 7/7 bombings of 2005. The murder of Lee Rigby on the streets of South London shocked the country. But unlike the 7/7 attack, carried out by men of Pakistani origin, the two suspects in May's killing are of African origin, both the children of Nigerian immigrants. That might not have come as a surprise to some experts. A report by the think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, last year warned that British youths from African communities could become radicalised. On today's debate here on The Voice of Russia, we're asking if that prediction is coming true. I'm joined by three guests. In the studio, we have Mohamed Elmi. He's chairman and founder of Somali Diaspora UK. Down the line, I'm joined by Roger Griffin, Professor of Modern History at Oxford Brookes University and a specialist in modern extremism. And also on the phone, we have Akin Ajayi, a freelance writer born in the UK and brought up in Nigeria and Britain. If I might start with you, Mohamed, the report by the Rusi Institute did say that Somali diaspora, there was a particular problem there. Is that your experience?
To be honest, like the way you said, the Somali diaspora UK who live in here, it's estimated, according to Home Office database, 500,000 people are living here. It's one of the largest immigrant African who live in United Kingdoms. But I think now they've been well-behaving and well-managed, really, and they've been living with this great nations, great society. And I think we participating in the way we represent our community. But I won't say that the Somali community are really 100% the youth are extremists and stuff
of course,
like that.
Not 100%. The Rusi report did say a tiny minority, but nevertheless, some Somali youths are perhaps dissatisfied or unhappy with their life here. There is perhaps a danger of radicalisation.
At this point, all I can point out is that there's youth Somali community who are in UK prisons. I think that those, when they come out from the prison, they should give a program called a rehabilitation project, so that will educate them and give them back to their normal life. But that is something that we discuss UK government, especially those who are liaising with the community. And in that perspective, if we got that, then they will be in the right directions and there's no problems. But I think if they don't get rehabilitation projects that they're looking for, and if they don't settle here when they come back, because what we know is when people come back from prisons, they know that their name has been under database of police authority or maybe criminals, and they can't find a decent job. And this is something that we need to worry, and this is something that where the extremists, they can come in and say, no, you don't have no hope, you don't have no life here existing anymore. So this is what they brainwash the youth, saying to them, when you got nothing to lose. So this is where we're coming from, to educate. That's what we're standing for, Somali Diaspora UK, to give proper integration to our community and our society.
Professor Griffin, is there a danger that we're over-egging from one particular incident of African youth perhaps being, or suspects being involved in this killing last month? Is there a danger of over-egging the danger here, or is this Rusi report does have some validity?
Well, the whole problem with radicalisation is that it is going to produce sporadic outrages, attacks on civil society, very difficult to predict. Despite the efforts of counter-terrorism, what the report, I think, has absolutely right is that there is a latent problem in all diaspora communities who are associated with Islam, that one or two, a very small percentage, it could be Pakistani, it could be Somalian, it could be Nigerian or whatever, will find their way to identifying with this global mission to create a global caliphate and become so dissociated from British society that they find a new identity in this other society. I would find it very counterproductive to try and identify, pinpoint particular ethnic groups or national groups as the source of the problem. It's not like it moves from Nigerians to Somalians to Afghans or whatever, but there is certainly a basic problem with the integration, not just, may I say, of Muslims, but of there are disaffected whites who may well end up committing a far right-wing outrage. Norway was sitting there a couple of years ago not feeling it had any major problem with integration, and you had the Breivik attack. So what we're dealing with is a European situation in which there are issues about identity and integration and feeling a sense of loss of roots, and this can occasionally, in a very small minority of disaffected people, produce a conversion to a radical sense of mission. But I do think we're barking up wrong trees when we try to focus on the particular problems of particular communities.
Well, just to focus on the Nigerian community for a moment, Akin, you grew up among Nigerian migrants here. Was there a feeling perhaps that Britain had failed them somehow, in that they didn't have any hope of a successful, happy life here, and that might radicalise them?
First of all, I'd like to say that I do agree in general with what Professor Griffin has just said. I think one should be cautious in drawing absolute generalizations about the experience of Nigerian migrants. Having said that, I think it's important as well to consider the peculiar circumstances of Nigerian migration to the United Kingdom in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. Certainly, there was a sense of discontent in the sense that integration was a difficult experience. And it has to be remembered that integration is a two-way process. There is, on the one hand, the desire of the need for there to be a space within the host community to accept and to welcome diverse cultural identity. But on the other hand, there also has to be a willingness on the part of the new arrivals to engage with the new dispensation. And I do think that, based on my experience, that certainly there was something of a mismatch, which could have created or could have led to, could have contributed to a sense of cultural alienation. Whether that is necessarily going to lead to radicalization is another matter altogether.
Professor Griffin, do we have a problem here in that if you look at America, for example, it has this narrative of everyone coming together in a melting pot and striving and achieving like that? Perhaps we don't quite have that same sort of narrative which gives immigrants a place.
It's very interesting you've just raised the question of America. You see, if we were living in America now, we'd still be trying to digest the Boston bombing, which has extraordinary parallels with what happened in Woolwich. You have two people who are outwardly quite integrated into American society, fairly popular, different personalities, but a process had gone on inside both of them, certainly initially with the elder brother, that meant that at a certain special moment, they no longer felt that they were trying to integrate into American society, but they identified with another base identity, which was their Chechen identity. And I think we've got to have a real sense of complexity here. I mean, one of the brothers, as we know, in Woolwich, started off his life within a well-integrated Christian family, and his need for identity and a sense of purpose in life drove him at a very deep subconscious level into flipping into a Muslim convert identity. And you see, the trouble is when we try to look for patterns, we're really dealing with things which are so unique to each situation that we cannot generalize about Chechens in the States, and we cannot generalize about Nigerians or Somalis or whatever in Britain. What we have to be aware of is the fact that we're living in a dangerous modern world. We have our civil societies and we have our media and our phones and our cars, etc. But there are the problem of how we actually live in this world, how we feel real, how we give ourselves a sense of purpose is massively complicated. Now, there are some societies which are overtly self-destructing, like Syria, but Britain, even if you sort of wander around in it and feel quite normal, inside the heads of millions of ordinary people, there are issues about purpose and value and meaning. And that quest for meaning, as I've tried to explore in my book, Terrorist Creed, which is all about this dimension of the quest for meaning and reality, can drive this, fortunately, a very small minority into this sort of heroic warrior mode where they feel comfortable really giving up their lives for some cause that they consider to be holy. Now, when people do that for saving poor people in Madras or something, we regard them as heroes. But when they do it for what they consider to be a just cause in their own worldview, we see them as monsters. And what was very significant was that one of the brothers was saying eye for an eye and trying to justify what he'd just done. We're dealing with very, very special states of mind, and we should beware of demonizing or generalizing about entire communities, and just accept the fact that to have a real comfortable sense of who we are and what we're doing on this planet is a great luxury. Millions of ordinary people are actually feeling very uncomfortable in their skin.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davis. Today's debate is about the radicalisation of Britain's African communities. I'm joined by Mohamed Elmi, chairman and founder of Somali Diaspora UK, Roger Griffin, Professor of Modern History at Oxford Brookes University, and also on the phone we have Akin Ajayi, a freelance writer brought up in the UK and Nigeria. Mohamed, do you feel that there's a danger of perhaps communities like yours becoming demonised in a way?
Put it this way, I think the whole issue, the whole tensions came up after the tragedy happened in Woolwich Street. I think that brave man, British soldier who lost his life in Barbary. I think probably the way they carry out when they're killing him in London Street, I think that is what I think the whole idea is. This is what they come from. The whole tension is. I think I believe myself speaking to my community. I think we have absolutely condemned the way they carry out when they're killing a brave man who is absolutely innocent, and the way they kill him and mentioning him when they're killing, say that Allahu Akbar. I don't think so. That was absolutely appropriate manner or appropriate way, and that is what the whole tensions bring up. And I think Allahu Akbar is that's the only Muslims community when they're using during the worships for their God and to make sure that they say God is greatness. But I think to kill someone innocent, that doesn't say in Islam, and there's no way in written in Islam book. And I think so it was absolutely wrong way, and I don't think so where we couldn't understand where that ideology came from really, and who brainwash and bring them into that level. I think Islam is a peace religion really, and killing somebody in the street in ugly way and shouting again Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, that is and that's kind of be jihad. That's a stupid things to do really. But what I think our community now worried is that the second week, I think what happened is the Islamic Center in Muscle Hill, where Somali community are running, completely diminished and banning.
And a series of demonstrations and protests, again, anti-immigration protests by people like the EDL and the BNP as well.
And they've done that. I think now our community are worried and they're feeling threatened, really. Those people who are behind it, they're trying to divide us. And I think these great nations live in a great society. UK is one of the most diverse country who live a multicultural society. Well, and I think Jew, Hindu, and Muslims, I think this is the time we come together, and I think as one nation, one people, and to demonstrate those who are trying to divide us, and they're not getting the way what they want.
Akin, you have contacts in the Nigerian community here in Britain. The people you talk to, are they worried about a backlash, especially because the two suspects in the killing last month are of Nigerian origin? Are they worried about a backlash against them?
Well, it's a rather interesting question, because I think that within the Nigerian community there is a very real desire to distance themselves from the actions of these two young men. And in that, there is a very clear assertion that these young people, even though they are of Nigerian ancestry, cannot really be regarded as Nigerian. It's a sort of Nigerian in name only sort of construct. Now, to be quite honest, I'm not entirely sure that's really helpful, and in the sense that one's getting the sense of a bit of a duality. On the one hand, you have a Nigerian community saying these are not Nigerians. It is a problem that started and that was nurtured in the United Kingdom, and the issue of Nigeria only comes about from their name and not much more. On the other hand, there was an interesting attempt in some parts of the British media to cast these two young men as being British-born Nigerians, which to my mind seems like a very, very curious construct. And it seems very much an either-or. They're either British or they're Nigerian. And I think it's much more interesting, much more useful to look at the personal experiences of these young men, and indeed of many people within the Nigerian community, people who are second-generation Nigerian, in the sense that their parents migrated to the United Kingdom from Nigeria in the 70s and 1980s, but are dealing with a very, very curious tension, whereby on the one hand, they have expectations of being quote-unquote Nigerian, and I think it's fair to say that Nigerian social values are probably a bit more conservative than British. But on the other hand, being in a physical environment that is at odds with what their parents expect of them, and trying to interpret what does it mean? They're not one or the other. They are a hybrid, and trying to validate that rather than dismissing it or trying to propose that it doesn't really exist.
I think what Akin has been talking about now is extremely important. There are some people who find the ambiguity, ambivalence, complexity of their identity very distressing. Some people just seem to be able to cope more with not knowing quite who they are or having various cultural, ethnic, linguistic elements in their lives. But some people, and fortunately for civil society, it's a very small minority, desperately need a single identity, and they cannot cope with the multicultural complexities of a modern society which is partly secular and partly materialistic and partly spiritual, etc. And particularly second generation immigrants all over the world are the most likely to experience tensions about identity and who they are. Very often the first generation immigrants have a strong sense of who they are, and their task is to integrate themselves, create a family, to create a material basis for their family. But the second generation suffer particularly from issues about identity, and we should be very thankful that so few, I mean, one could almost, it's a terrible thing I'm going to say, but I'm actually surprised how few acts of violence there are from people who feel quite desperate inside about living in a modern society without a clear sense of who they are. And if you look at the 7/7 bombings, if you look at the Boston bombings, etc., you'll see a pattern there. It's very often second generation young people who have a deeper thirst for knowing what they are and who they are and what they should do with their lives. And it's a need so strong that they will sacrifice their comfortable life for what they have been persuaded or have persuaded themselves is something more important than life itself. And it's a tragic phenomenon, but we should not start moving into panics. And we should also realize that the EDL and the BNP and racists who try to exploit this situation are also people who have a far deeper need for a single identity and a certain image of Britain than most ordinary people. And again, we should be thankful that there are so few EDL members and so few BNP members, given the massive amount of multiculturalism in Britain. I'm still proud to be in a nation which responds in such a civilized way to outrages against itself. And so, in a way, though it's awful to have an attack on a mosque or attack on a community centre, we should also celebrate the fact that, in the main, most people are appalled by violence. And what still stands out for me from the Woolwich bombing was the amazing humanity of those three women who got personally involved with either caring for the victim or talking to the perpetrator. Now that is an extraordinary image of what a healthy civil society can produce.
You've talked about the second generation perhaps being slightly confused. Is there much evidence for the third generation perhaps settling down?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but I would be very, very surprised if there wasn't good evidence that by the third generation there are far more well-established patterns. Can I just point out that for every person who actually commits an outrage like these two men, there are extraordinary things going on in all multicultural societies towards creating forms of culture and music. I mean, there's a celebration of Bollywood going on in Britain, and there are artists like Nitin Sawhney, and most British people have an incredible mixture of cultural and religious and social elements in their lives. So in a way, multiculturalism is producing a massive enrichment of society, which the third generation may be able to enjoy. But I do feel that civil society, families, faith leaders, schools are probably missing a trick here. They really should focus a bit more energy in looking at the plight of people who may outwardly seem to be quite integrated, as the Boston bombers were, but inwardly are going through a very deep personal trauma.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davis. Today's debate is about the radicalisation of Britain's African communities. I'm joined by Mohamed Elmi, Chairman and Founder of Somali Diaspora UK, Roger Griffin, Professor of Modern History at Oxford Brookes University, and also on the phone we have Akin Ajayi, a freelance writer brought up in the UK and Nigeria. Mohamed, that's the sort of work you do, of course, that they're trying to integrate, especially young people, back into the community when they might be slightly radicalised already.
Yes, you're right. I think it's part of our aim and objective, really, to bring the community together and liaise and to integrate them, really.
Do you feel like you've had much help from the British government? I mean, I understand that the worries about sort of MI5 trying to recruit people in the Somali community.
Well, I think the UK government, really, we're working well together as a community leader, including the police and whoever really associate with. And I think what I think is important at this stage is, since it's happened. This is the second time happened, and as my colleague both mentioned earlier on, 7/7 bomb July. I think it was a test. It happened, and this is the second time happened in Woolwich Street, which I think what we witnessed, all of us, was sickening, really, and something really very, very awful. But I think what's important is that the UK government should bring up a strategy for long terms, how they could engage not only Somali, any other minority or ethnic community who live in here, whether it's a Bengali or Pakistani or Nigerians or whatever, to bring them how they could integrate, really, how they can come together and work as a one nation, really. It's very, very important. And I think Mr. Cameron, he has a couple of meetings, I think, in this regard, and they coming up with some sort of strong proposal, how they engaging and dealing and working together this times closely to the community, which I think is something what we welcome ourselves.
But talking about MI5, I understand that there has been concern in the Somali community about people being coerced to spy for the security services.
Well, I think it happened before, and I think it might happen. But I think when it comes to MI5, really, we support the job they're doing in UK, and I think they are protecting us, including whoever who live here. And Somali community, we have a right really to support them, the scale of level job they're doing. And I think so that there's a lot of Somali community who educated in here, getting a postgraduate here. They're working with them, we welcome with them to work with them alongside to make sure that they work in Al-Shabaab, who are really threatening to our community, our country, back home, how to eliminate them, and also to work with them in here, those we think they might radicalize. I think it's important that our community to work with them. But I think what is not important for them, what the community sometimes they're concerned is that if the MI5, they engage a wrong person and ask them to work with them, that is something that we previously concerned, and that I think we articulated, in UK paper. I think Independent Time, I think, has been wrote in an article myself. They're asking me in a position that, what do you think? I think the community, and we clearly tell them that we have no problem to work with the UK government. We have absolutely clearly work with them and wanted them to achieve whatever they wanted to achieve and how they want to secure UK street. We understand that Somali community, especially youth, they have a serious concern when they come into ports, international airport, including Heathrow, Gatwick, or etc., whatever it is. When they come in, they've been really holding hours, you see, to double check where they went, when they come back. It's part of their own strategy. We welcome that. But I think what we don't want to come is people like Mo Farah, who is absolutely celebrity, well-known, being holding in Heathrow Airport or maybe JFK Kennedy Airport.
Well, it was held in an American airport, I understand, not a British one, obviously.
No, in British one, but I'm giving an example. So, and I think that's something that people who celebrating and those who's innocent, I mean, our youth, they're not really threatening to UK. They're not extremists. They're not, walk with them. Those who associate or might bringing something stupid things to our street. But I think we welcome to work with them. But I think what we need is to have, a sensible way.
Akin, something that's rarely mentioned, I suppose, is the impact of British foreign policy on radicalisation. Should we be slightly more sort of nuanced in how we react when we go abroad? I mean, the two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were mentioned by the two suspects in Woolwich.
Well, it's a terribly complex issue because it's very easy to suggest that there are absolute rights and absolute wrongs with regards to the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan, and I can't pretend to be an expert in this issue. Having said that, there certainly is an absolute imperative. I mean, it's the underpinning the basis of democracy that if the British foreign policy proposes to intervene in the affairs of another state, it has to be justified in absolute terms and complete terms, and there has to be a clear consensus across the board. Having said that, whether one wants to consider that the British presence in Afghanistan or in Iraq a few years before was correct or not, I don't think that can be seen as justification for acts of violence in the United Kingdom, such as the one we're discussing at the moment. And in that sense, I think it's also important to acknowledge that whatever may have prompted the two young men to do what they're alleged to have done, they should be perceived as outliers, as on the outer fringes of a very, very long continuum. And there are other perfectly acceptable and perfectly legitimate means of voicing opposition to British foreign policy, such as debate, such as protest, and by voting.
Professor Griffin, is that the case is that sometimes we forget that we go out in the world, the British government has these actions, and they have an impact, and some of the impact is actually at home?
Well, I do. As a simple consumer of mass media in Britain, I am aware of a sort of doublethink going on. In the debate on multiculturalism, there's very clear policies towards integration and the recognition that we are a multiple nation. But in other debates, there's a sort of perception that there is a sort of white Anglo-Saxon traditional Britain that makes decisions and carries out policies which could be perceived as continuations of imperialist attitudes towards other nations in the Middle East and towards Islam, etc. And I do think that that there is a sort of hubris, there's a sort of arrogance about, for example, the way we got into the Iraq and Afghanistan without really, it's a bit like not having joined up thinking. There are different agencies within British politics, some of which still operate in a sort of 19th century mode, and some of which are extremely sensitive to the multicultural communities that make us up. And I don't think the government, when it's making foreign policy decisions, gives enough thought to the perception of Britain and England and Englishness and the signals that we're sending out. And I do think that in time, these two areas of British thinking and policy do have to be brought together, because it's very easy, if you are from a non-Anglo-British background, to feel deeply alienated by some aspects of official politics in Britain.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So I'd like to thank my three guests: Mohamed Elmi, Chairman and Founder of Somali Diaspora UK; Roger Griffin, Professor of Modern History at Oxford Brookes University; and Akin Ajayi, a freelance writer born and brought up in the UK and Nigeria. Thank you all very much, the three of you.
Thank you very much.